First Take fam, what's up? Lucky you. You get more QT with your boys. Welcome into First Take's 2016 Fantasy Football Special, part of ESPN's Fantasy Football Marathon, presented by DraftKings. Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman. I'm Molly Carey. You guys excited?
Don't question our level of dedication. I'm usually busy doing other things right now, but I'm here.
You are here.
Okay, for fantasy football, which I've never played in my life.
And you know what? People are going to get to see your first draft.
And I have 3 small children, but I had to tell them, girls, I'm sorry.
Stop it.
Daddy's having a relationship with the NFL now.
Cry me a river. First world
I just want everybody to know, I want to say for the record before we do this, Molly Karam is a cheater.
No, I'm not.
She's a cheater with fantasy football.
How am I a cheater?
She's a cheater. You'll find out.
I'm just better than you. I have sources.
Better than me. Better than me.
And a better trash talker, too, let's be honest. All right, let's get into it. So we're going to debate the biggest storylines of fantasy football, and don't miss, as we just talked about, our fantasy draft. So you'll see who has the best team in just a bit. But we are going to start, please, Max, I saw you, at the top of the fantasy football rankings. Based on average draft position in all leagues, the top pick is Steelers wide receiver Antonio Brown, who led in fantasy points among non-quarterbacks last season. However, right behind him is Giants rising star Odell Beckham, who is second to Brown in points per game for non-quarterbacks over the last 2 seasons. Max Kellerman with the second best team at this desk.
It's an outrage.
Who will be the best wide receiver in the NFL this season?
Well, in fantasy, it's Antonio Brown. Because they have a great offensive line.
Whose team is he on?
Ben Roethlisberger. Well, you picked right before me, or else I would have taken Antonio Brown. But great offensive line, great quarterback. You saw what he did last year. Now he's going to be targeted even more because the second best wideout on the team is not going to be available this season. And actually, the third best wideout on the team is the running back. Le'Veon Bell's not going to be available for the first 4 games. So it's all going to Antonio Brown. In reality football, the answer is Odell Beckham. And in fact, Odell Beckham Jr. was the best receiver in football as a rookie. Last year, he was in there was Antonio Brown, there was him, and, there are a couple different guys there. And Des Bryant, when he's healthy, is going to be right there. And Julio Jones, when he's healthy, is going to be right there. But when you look at the underlying metrics, right, when you see about how these guys do against all different kinds of coverage, in terms of all different kinds of depth, in terms of the routes they run, etc., Odell Beckham, over his first 2 seasons, it's either him or Antonio Brown is the best receiver in football. And at a certain point, Beckham's been the best receiver ever, arguably, through his first 2 seasons, for receivers through their first 2 seasons. At a certain point, it stops being about, oh, he's the best at this age, he's the best through 2 seasons. And as they enter their prime, this happens with all athletes, it just turns into he's the best. Beckham's entering his 3rd season now. He's bigger than Antonio Brown. I believe he's more physically talented than Antonio Brown. I think the numbers support it, the underlying numbers, given his age, etc., given his numbers of years of service in the league so far. And I think the eyeball test tells you the same thing. That crazy catch he made, it actually works against him, because everyone talks about, oh, yeah, you're just thinking about the catch. No, the catch showed you something, but the week in and week out performance tells you something else. This is much like it was the Jerry Rice era and you had a lot of other good receivers, and then it was the Randy Moss era and you had a lot of other good receivers. I believe we are entering the Odell Beckham era, and you have a lot of other good receivers, but Odell is number 1.
Well, you can continue to say that, but the fact of the matter is you have no evidence to support you, regardless of that soliloquy you just went on. You don't have any evidence that this man is better than Antonio Brown. 136 receptions the last 2 years, 1,800+ yards. I mean, there's no question that Antonio Brown's the best wide receiver in football, fantasy, and reality. Julio Jones, to me, is more comparable to Antonio Brown than Odell Beckham. Now, Odell Beckham will steal highlight reels. The catches that he does make, he definitely leans towards the spectacular, but there's a reason he had 40 less receptions than Antonio Brown and Julio Jones. Let's make sure we pay attention to that. Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be the greatest receiver in all of football. He has the talent that speaks to that, and as he matures and grows, definitely that's going to play a role. But the fact of the matter is, this kid Sterling Shepard, unless he elevates himself or unless Victor Cruz gets healthy, we don't know how much pressure is going to be brought to bear. You got to remember, even though Eli Manning's reliable, their running game ain't ain't that reliable. The offensive line is not that reliable. And the wideout position, along with the tight end spot, is all questionable outside of Odell Beckham Jr. So that puts even more pressure exponentially on the shoulders of Odell Beckham. Well, what does Antonio Brown have? With Marcus Wheaton there, with a Sammy Coates, with a Ladarius Green, with a Le'Veon Bell, with a D'Angelo Williams. Last year, you had all of those guys without Ladarius Green. You had Mike, I'm sorry, Schuler. I'm sorry.
Bryant.
No, I'm talking about your tight end. Your tight end, Heath
Miller.
Heath Miller.
Yeah.
I apologize. I got brain loss for a second. Heath Miller is your tight end spot. He's no longer there. But you had him before you had Ladarius Green. So if you're Antonio Brown, last year you had, you had Heath, Miller, you had D'Angelo, all right? You had D'Angelo Williams, you had Le'Veon Bell, you had Marcus Wheaton, you had a younger Sammy Coates, okay?
Martavis Bryant.
All right, you had Martavis Bryant, and you still had 136 receptions. He's a bad boy. So when I look at it from that perspective, and the fact, let's not forget this about Antonio Brown, which is something we haven't heard about Odell Beckham Jr. Antonio Brown watched Des Bryant and Demaryius Thomas get $70 million contracts last year. Antonio Brown wanted to renegotiate his thing last year. He wanted to renegotiate it this time around. He's anticipating and counting on his money, but knows good and damn well the Steelers, who are not prone to negotiate with you before you're entering the last year of your deal if you are not a quarterback. Antonio Brown knows he has something to prove.
It's the best point you've made.
And Big Ben Roethlisberger knows
I
that
can't
he has
argue
to
with
take
any of
care
that.
of Antonio Brown.
I can't argue with any of that. After his rookie season, I looked into, how Beckham Jr. and Antonio Brown and Julio Jones and Des Bryant and Demaryius Thomas, all the young receivers compared against different kinds of coverage, et cetera. And at the time, it was popular to say Des is the best in the league of the young guys, and then maybe Julio Jones, because they were the bigger, stronger guys. And what I found was it was virtually a dead heat between Odell Beckham and Antonio Brown, the underlying numbers. Where there was a very slight advantage, it actually went to Odell as a rookie, when he was a rookie and Antonio Brown was already a veteran. And then there was a little drop-off, and Julio Jones and Des Bryant were right there. Last year, Odell had some maturing to do, and Antonio Brown's already a mature player. No doubt about that. I'm betting that in this third season, Odell takes yet another step forward. Given his age, given his years in the league, it's reasonable to expect his trajectories going up, and even a slight uptick in Odell's trajectory and in where he is right now puts him ahead of everyone else, because he's in a virtual heat with those guys now. And then I would just say about the eyeball test. There's a reason why Odell Beckham Jr., there was a list recently about the most famous athletes in the world, and the first NFL player to show up was Peyton Manning, because we're talking about globally, and NFL's not as big globally as some other sports. The next name to show up is Odell Beckham Jr. Now, why is that? Well, he's playing in a big market. He made a spectacular catch. No. Odell has the kind of talent that cuts through. People watching can look at that guy, even with crazy talents like Dez and Julio and Antonio, they can look at that guy and say, see that guy? He's a little different than everybody else.
Missed 4 games his rookie year. Missed just 1 game last year. Hamstring history. Now you're talking about him being a target. He got 45 less targets than Julio Jones last year. He should close that gap this year without question. But the flip side is, if that gap closes, so does him becoming more of a target. And we don't know whether or not he has the durability to deal with that. We know that Odell Beckham Jr. can play. It's almost like shadow boxing. Somebody's in the mirror, or somebody, shadow boxing, swinging. Well, it's entirely different when you get hit. Same thing is applicable to football. It's entirely different when you get hit. Now, who am I to say that about Antonio Brown? Because we saw what happened to him when Vontaze Burfict knocked him damn near unconscious. But that was a headshot with him coming over the middle, per se. Outside of that, Antonio Brown has been relatively reliable. He has played in all 16 games the last 3 years. So when we look at it from that perspective, and the fact that he's playing for new money, a new contract, and he's got Big Ben Roethlisberger throwing him the football, albeit an improved Eli Manning over the last 2 years, but still somebody who's led the league in interceptions on 3 separate occasions. Let's not sleep on the fact that Antonio Brown still every reason to believe that he should be number 1 over Odell.
Antonio Brown is one of the reasons you love watching football. I mean, you got nothing bad to say about it.
Odell 2, Julio 3, and I think DeAndre will be interesting, someone new throwing to him, and Brock Osweiler, and then Des Bryant, of course, will be healthy and his quarterback. When we come back, we move to the quarterback position. The reigning MVP was the most productive quarterback in the NFL last season, but neither Max or Stephen A. think Cam will be top dog in 2016. They'll explain when we come back.